You sit down in the pub. Not many people are in tonight. Just a few in the corner playing cards. The open fire roars and heats the room up nicely, when suddenly a man appears as if from nowhere. The people in the corner haven't noticed until he picks up a kettle next to the fireplace and throws it towards them. It crashes on the floor and they all look over in shock. Before they notice him, the man disappears. Welcome to Ghost Tales by the Fireside. This episode is the first about haunted village pubs in the Midlands county of Worcestershire, in England. The Bull's Head Inn is in the village of Inkborough and is well known in the local area to be haunted. The village was first recorded in 789 and was called Instanborgus, meaning Insta's Barrows. There are two pubs in Inkborough, the Bull's Head Inn and the Old Bull, a 16th century timber framed building, where it's believed that William Shakespeare once stopped off when he was travelling to Worcester to collect his marriage licence to Anne Hathaway. In 1645, during the English Civil War, Charles I stayed overnight in the vicarage and left his maps behind. They are now held at the County Record Office in Worcester. A local legend says that Charles I buried his soldiers' wages somewhere in the village, but they have never been found. From the 1960s to 1993, the landlady and her husband of the Bull's Head experienced a lot of activity, which turned them from being completely sceptical to being believers in the paranormal. While the landlady was serving breakfast one morning, a man from Yorkshire was staying at the inn when he noticed a stream of liquid pouring from the ceiling. He told her that he thought they had a leak. She went out to have a look and realised there was no water source in the room above. It was just an empty room. When she looked on the floor for the liquid, there was nothing there. The guest helped to look, and he confirmed there was nothing there. A local barman used to stay at the pub on occasions to help out early the next morning. When he stayed over, he would always be up early and let the cleaner in. One morning, the landlady was walking down the stairs and he asked her where she went so early in the morning. He said that he got up around 6 a.m. and answered the door because he heard the landlady calling him. There was no one there. Minutes later, it happened again. After the Christmas rush in the pub, the landlady's parents went to stay for her mother's birthday. After the pub had closed and locked up, her father went to bed and the rest of the family sat in the pub's lounge. After a few minutes, they heard her father calling her husband, so he went upstairs to see if he was okay. He was asleep. He went back down the stairs and they heard it again. Her mother was so frightened that she hid behind the bar and refused to come out. A few days later, the landlady was walking down the stairs and she saw the door at the bottom open. Catching a glimpse of the back of a long, pale, frilly dress, she rushed down the stairs and ran into the room, shouting, "I've got you." But there was no one there. A guest who was interested in ghost stories was told by the landlady that the pub was haunted and didn't believe her. After a good night's sleep, he woke the next morning, telling the landlady, "I didn't believe you when you said the pub was haunted, but I woke up this morning to see a woman sitting on the bed." One morning in February 1991, a guest went down the stairs asking if the pub was haunted. He said that he'd got out of bed early that morning, and as he went to the bathroom, he looked over his shoulder and saw someone else getting out of the bed. A guest from America was staying on the first floor, and early one morning, the landlady heard him shouting. She quickly got out of bed and went to the top of the stairs, witnessing the ghost of a beautiful woman walking up towards her. She had entered the guest's room and left, and then walked up the stairs. She described her as looking perfect. She looked in her 40s and had long blonde hair. She was wearing a long white silky dress. She said that she fluttered up the stairs and she didn't feel scared at all. She then just disappeared. She told the American guest that it was a ghost, and he didn't believe her. Throughout the rest of his stay, he kept asking where the beautiful blonde was. In the summer of 1977, a local teenager who was friends with the landlady's daughter used to stay over at the pub on occasions. One night she was woken up by something cold and wet touching her, from her hip to her shoulder. She sat up to suddenly hear a whoosh sound shoot across the room from her side and out through the closed door. One day in 1990, a woman was helping the landlady by doing some ironing. She said that she felt as if someone else was in the room. She turned around to see a young girl fading away. She described her as wearing a long pale blue dress and wearing a hat with a scarf over it. She had long blonde hair and was very pretty. Her clothes looked like they were from the 17th century, and she looked around 20 years old. The local people of Inkborough believe that a young seamstress died in the area in the 17th century, and she returns from time to time. A little further down the road from the Boar's Head is a bungalow, where in 2006, a father and son were working as removal men and moving the family out of the bungalow. The bungalow has a basement room, and the father asked his son to go down there and fetch the rocking chair that was near the fireplace. He went down there, and there was an old man sat on the chair, smoking a pipe. He waved his pipe as if to say hello. He went back upstairs to tell his father that he couldn't bring the chair up yet, as someone was sitting on it. The owner of the bungalow overheard this and asked who was sat on the chair, as no one else was there. He told him about the old man smoking a pipe, and described him wearing brown trousers and a white shirt, with his sleeves rolled up. The house owner's face dropped. He then told them that it sounds like his wife's father, who used to live in the basement room. He died around 6 months ago. There's an old ghost story known as Old Bookle, the Headless Horseman, who is supposed to travel along the road between Throckmorton and Bishampton. The story has been told over a few generations, with not many realising that there was much truth behind the tale. When a researcher was searching for the will of an ancestor, John Frederick Bookle, he came across the true story behind the ghost. On the 25th of January, 1879, John Bookle, who was a tenant farmer, went to Ulster to pay his rent and to meet a business associate from Birmingham in a local pub. He heard news that the business associate was going to be very late, so John had to spend the day in the pub to wait for him. He finally left the pub at 11 p.m. Around 11:15 midnight, The landlord at the Bull's Head in Inkborough heard the sound of a horse and cart going up the drive next to the inn. He went outside to investigate and found that a cart had been turned over with the body of a man lying under it. It was John Bookle. The landlord described him as having his head turned under his body. The Old Mug House in Claines, near Worcester, is one of the only 2 pubs in England that are built on consecrated land. The church was built in the 15th century on the site of an earlier church, and the Old Mug House was most likely built around the same time. In the Middle Ages, it was considered respectable to drink ale and wine, and many churches owned their own alehouses, which also brought in a tidy profit. The Old Mug House was lucky, as many of the church-owned breweries and pubs were closed during the short reign of Oliver Cromwell, who was a Puritan. The Old Mug House has been known to be haunted for many years. An old legend says that a ghost goes to the pub and shouts, "Beware." He then walks into the church and plays the organ. During a renovation in 1972, an external wall was damaged during a storm. There was a shiny object buried within the wall, which turned out to be the silver head of a bishop's crook that once belonged to a previous bishop of Worcester. It's now used by the Claines boy bishop. A landlord who ran the pub from 1938 until 1982 was always sceptical about the hauntings, but he did admit that he could never figure out what the unexplained noises were that would happen all over the pub, and the mallet that he used to tap the beer with was never where he left it. The landlord's wife was more open to the idea of the paranormal and found the pub a strange place. She claimed that they would often hear glasses rattling and footsteps all over the pub when no one else was there. One day she heard someone going up the stairs. She rushed to the door and locked it behind them. She then called her husband and they went up the stairs to see who it was, but there was no one there. At night, she used to leave a plate of biscuits on a shelf in case their children woke up hungry. They never used to get up in the night, and very often the biscuits would be gone. They thought that it may be mice, but they never found any crumbs or droppings, and no other food ever disappeared. From 1989, another couple took on the pub. They were both sceptical about the ghost stories, but it wasn't long before they changed their minds. From the first day in the pub, their dog would bark and howl when he was in the kitchen. The entrance to the cellar was in the kitchen, where many strange things occurred. Things were always moving around in the cellar, and the doors were often opening and closing. When a group of people stayed over in the cellar to raise money for a local charity, they claimed to have heard children singing the nursery rhyme, "Pop Goes the Weasel." One Sunday afternoon, about 3 months after moving in, they invited some friends who were staying in the village from London and some local neighbours round while the pub was closed. Suddenly, they heard a crash from beyond the bar. They ran over to investigate and they found that about 12 glasses had been smashed on the floor. They were broken to the extent that they were in tiny pieces, indicating that they were smashed with a great force. Their friends who were staying in the cottage next door were so scared that they packed their luggage and went back to London. Only a few weeks later, it happened again. The barman and their niece were standing at the bar, talking, when they heard a crash from beyond the bar. The same thing happened. The glasses were smashed so hard that you couldn't tell how many glasses had been broken. In 2017, a couple managed a pub for 6 months in the village of Bourneheath near Bromsgrove called the New Inn. After running the pub for around 2 months, they started to experience some strange things. Objects in the kitchen would be moved, and the fridge would often be turned off at night, causing them to have a lot of food wastage. During the next few weeks, they started to experience some strange activity in the restaurant. Their son worked the bar with his friend, and they had to lock up. They separated and went all over the pub to check that all of the doors and windows were closed and locked. And then they met each other in the middle beyond the bar, which is at the centre of the pub. They heard a noise coming from the restaurant side of the pub and went to investigate, when they both witnessed a chair sliding across the floor as if it was being dragged by an invisible person. One night, a barmaid was fetching some wine from the restaurant side of the bar when she came running back, saying that she saw a woman wearing a Victorian-style dress that walked through the kitchen wall towards her. After speaking to a small group of locals who had been using the pub for many years to play cards and dominoes, told them that one night when they were in the middle of a game, a brass kettle that was in front of the open fire at the other end of the bar room was suddenly thrown at them. They looked at the kettle and it had a dent in the top from that night. They heard that many people had witnessed seeing the ghost of a man who would stand near the fireplace and in the corridor to the toilet area. None of the locals knew anything about the history of the pub, so they'd done some research of their own. They found that a man was killed in the pub after a bare-knuckle fight in 1889. After an argument over a brass button, the two men, Thomas Price and Albert Waldron, they decided to settle the dispute with a fight. The fight lasted 3 rounds before Alfred was knocked to the ground, the final blow taking his life. The locals insisted that Price should be punished for murder, but the coroner ruled that his sentence should be reduced to manslaughter. The couple was sat in the bar one afternoon, talking to a local couple who went in the pub often, and they told them about the story behind the ghost. And the woman said that Alfred Waldron was her great-great-grandfather, and she said that she knew of the ghost story, but didn't believe that anyone had experienced anything. Thank you for listening to Ghost Tales by the Fireside. If you enjoy this channel, please subscribe and give me a thumbs up. It's very appreciated. You can find out more information about the episodes on the website, ghosttales.co.uk, and on the Facebook and Instagram pages at Ghost Tales Podcast. All music, research, writing, production, art and sound effects are my own work.